The courtroom was quiet, but not comfortably quiet. It had that tense kind of silence that makes you aware of every sound, the soft shuffle of papers, the low hum of the air conditioning, the occasional cough from someone sitting too long in the hard chairs. People were murmuring in small groups, trying not to seem too curious, but curiosity was impossible to hide. Something unusual was happening today, though no one yet realized exactly what. A young girl, only 17, was walking into the courtroom with her notebook clutched tightly against her chest. She moved with a calm confidence, though her heart was pounding. She had been in situations before where adults had underestimated her. Sometimes it happened at school, sometimes in public, and today she had a front row seat to something far bigger, an adult court where people's lives and decisions hung in balance. As she walked past the rows of seats, a few people whispered, "She's really young," someone said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the courtroom's fragile order. Another voice, older and more authoritative, murmured, "I don't know why they're even letting her in here." She ignored them both, keeping her eyes forward. She had learned long ago that when people underestimate you, the best response is calm confidence. The louder they try to mock, the quieter you need to stay. The judge's bench loomed high at the front of the courtroom. He was a man in his 60s with a reputation for being sharp, direct, and not particularly kind to anyone who challenged him. Some people admired his no-nonsense approach, while others quietly feared him. He had a way of speaking that could make people feel small without ever raising his voice. Today, his eyes immediately fell on the young girl as she approached. There was a flicker of amusement, almost like he was looking at a child who had wandered into an adult world by mistake. "Are you here for the case, young lady?" he asked, his tone dripping with a mix of curiosity and barely disguised condescension. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied clearly, her voice steady even though she could feel her palms sweating. The judge raised an eyebrow, as if the idea of a teenager in his courtroom was itself a joke. "You do understand that this is a serious matter, right? Courtrooms are not classrooms. Do you have any idea what you're doing here?" She nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, I'm here to give testimony." The judge smirked slightly, clearly expecting her to stumble or look confused. He had seen many people in his courtroom get flustered, mostly adults who thought they knew better. He liked to see the panic in their eyes, but this girl did not panic. She looked straight at him, her gaze steady and calm, and spoke with the clarity of someone who had been trained to communicate carefully and respectfully. "Very well," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Let's see if you can keep up." The courtroom clerk started reading out the case details, but the young girl was already focused. She had spent hours preparing for this moment. She had read the case file over and over, memorizing the facts, understanding the laws involved, and even thinking about how the judge might try to trip her up. She wasn't just a witness. She was prepared to handle the courtroom in a way that no one expected. As she took the stand, she noticed the eyes in the audience watching her. Some looked skeptical, some curious, and a few were outright amused. She could feel the judge's eyes on her, weighing her, sizing her up. He probably assumed that because she was young and because she was black, she would be easy to dismiss. That assumption made her smile slightly, though only in her mind. She had learned that underestimation could be a powerful tool if used correctly. "Please state your name for the record," the clerk said. She gave her full name clearly, enunciating every word. It was simple, direct, and firm. The judge scribbled something on his papers, then looked up at her with a faint smirk. "Very well. Now tell me, how old are you?" 17, Your Honor," she answered. The smirk widened just a little, and for a moment he let out a small chuckle. 17. You're still in high school then?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her tone polite but unwavering. "And you expect this court to take you seriously? You're a child. You can't possibly understand the complexities of this case." His words were sharp, meant to cut, and he leaned slightly forward in his chair, as if daring her to answer. She didn't hesitate. She looked him directly in the eyes and said, "I understand enough to give accurate testimony, Your Honor. I've prepared carefully and I know the facts of the case." The judge paused, clearly taken aback by her composure. No one had spoken to him like that in years. He was used to adults who trembled under his gaze, who stammered when challenged, and who assumed their youth somehow gave them insight he would overlook. But this girl wasn't trembling. She wasn't stammering. She wasn't apologizing for being young. She was speaking with certainty. The courtroom was still buzzing quietly. People shifted in their seats, whispering to each other. Some were surprised, some skeptical, but everyone could sense that something unusual was happening. This was not the usual witness stand moment where someone meekly read what they had been told to say. This girl was commanding the room without even raising her voice. "Very well," the judge said after a moment. "Let's begin." The questions started simple: names, dates, events. But even the simplest questions had a sharp undertone, as if the judge was testing her ability to handle pressure. He made small, dismissive remarks as he asked each question, trying to provoke a reaction, trying to make her seem naive or unprepared. "Are you sure you remember all of this, young lady? It's a lot for someone your age to take in," he said, almost mocking. She simply nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I've reviewed all the details carefully. I'm confident in my recollection." A small murmur ran through the audience. The adults exchanged glances, clearly impressed by her calm, measured response. The judge, on the other hand, frowned slightly. He had not expected someone so young to be so prepared, so confident, and so articulate. As the questioning continued, the judge's remarks became sharper. He made subtle comments about her background, implying that her experience growing up could not possibly give her the insight needed for this case. But she didn't flinch. She answered each question with clarity, keeping her responses precise and factual. Every word she spoke showed not just understanding, but poise, intelligence, and a surprising depth for someone her age. By the time the initial questioning was over, whispers were spreading throughout the courtroom. People were leaning forward in their seats, eyes wide, watching this young girl defy every expectation. She had entered the room as a witness, a teenager underestimated by everyone, but she was slowly turning the situation on its head. Even the judge was beginning to show signs of uncertainty. He was used to being the smartest person in the room, to having control over the narrative. But this girl had not only held her ground, she had subtly challenged his assumptions without ever appearing disrespectful. At that moment, she realized something important. Confidence alone was not enough. Knowledge and preparation were what truly commanded respect. She had both, and it was showing. And though the judge had not yet realized it, this courtroom was about to witness something completely unexpected. She looked around briefly, taking in the room, the skeptical faces, the murmurs, the judge's focused eyes. This was her moment. She wasn't here to prove herself to strangers. She was here to do her job, to present the truth clearly and accurately, and to navigate a world that had long underestimated young black girls like her. And in that moment, she felt something shift inside the courtroom. The balance of power, the assumptions everyone had made about her based on age and appearance were no longer unchallenged. Something was about to change. She didn't know how far it would go yet, but she was ready. The judge adjusted in his chair, a faint frown on his face, clearly trying to regain the control he thought he had. But for the first time in a long time, someone had stood their ground, calmly, firmly, and respectfully, without bowing to fear or intimidation. And that someone was a 17-year-old girl who had just walked into a courtroom, unafraid of being underestimated, and ready to show the world that intelligence and courage could come in any age, any background, and any appearance. The courtroom was still buzzing quietly from the unusual scene earlier. People couldn't stop whispering to each other. Some were clearly impressed by the young girl's confidence, others skeptical, unable to understand how someone so young could hold her own so easily in front of a judge known for being intimidating. But behind her calm exterior, the girl, still only 17, was thinking far beyond what anyone in the room could imagine. To anyone watching, she seemed like an ordinary high school student, a teenager trying her best to answer questions clearly and accurately. But in reality, she was anything but ordinary. She had been preparing for moments like this for years, learning skills most people her age didn't even think about. Since she was 12, she had been fascinated by the law. While other kids worried about video games or social media, she read legal books, memorized court procedures, and even attended real court sessions whenever she could. Her knowledge wasn't just from books. She had studied cases in detail, watched attorneys in action, and learned how judges behaved under pressure. She understood that law wasn't just about knowing the rules. It was about strategy, timing, and using your mind to turn assumptions into opportunities. And today she was putting all of that into practice. While the courtroom saw her as a young witness, in truth, she had been working as a licensed attorney for several months. She had passed the bar exam in a special early admission program, something very few teenagers had ever achieved. Most people couldn't even imagine it. Passing the bar at her age wasn't just about intelligence. It required discipline, focus, and a level of maturity far beyond most adults. But she had all of that, carefully hidden behind the appearance of a regular teenager, because she knew the world often judged people before truly understanding them. She had chosen to attend this courtroom undercover, not as an attorney, but as a witness. Her reason wasn't personal, it was professional. She was helping a community case, one that involved issues of fairness, honesty, and accountability. By being present, she could gather information, observe how the courtroom operated, and even subtly influence events if necessary. But no one could suspect that the quiet, confident teenager in the witness stand was actually the attorney behind much of the legal strategy. As the judge leaned back in his chair, trying to regain control after underestimating her, she kept her eyes forward. She had noticed the way he looked at her, that flicker of surprise, the momentary hesitation. It was small, almost imperceptible, but she knew it meant he was realizing she was different from what he had expected. Judges relied on assumptions, and when someone defied those assumptions, it created an opening. And she was ready to take advantage of that opening, not in arrogance, but in calm, calculated intelligence. She remembered one of her earliest lessons. The courtroom was not a place for showy displays. It was a place for clarity, honesty, and precision. Overconfidence or arrogance could ruin even the most brilliant person's credibility. That's why she spoke slowly, carefully, and deliberately, choosing every word with purpose. Every answer she gave, every reaction she displayed was designed to communicate respect, professionalism, and intelligence all at once. Meanwhile, the judge continued his questioning, unaware that he was slowly losing the subtle control he usually held over witnesses. He tried to make her appear unsure, asking questions in ways that were meant to trip her up. But she anticipated his tactics. Years of observation had taught her that courtroom psychology was just as important as law itself. When someone tried to make her nervous, she stayed calm. When they tried to belittle her, she stayed respectful. The more they underestimated her, the stronger her position became. The audience in the courtroom was starting to notice something unusual. People were leaning forward in their seats, eyes fixed on her. The murmurs were growing louder, not with mockery but with curiosity. Some whispered to each other, "She's so young, but she's answering perfectly." Others exchanged glances, unsure if what they were seeing could be real. For many, it was the first time they had witnessed a teenager command attention, in a courtroom without fear, hesitation, or error. Behind the scenes, she was thinking ahead. She knew that her biggest challenge wasn't just answering questions, it was managing perception. Judges, attorneys, and juries often made quick judgments based on appearances. She had to keep her identity hidden for now. Revealing that she was an attorney too soon could create tension, distract from the case, or even provoke unnecessary conflict. Patience, she knew, was essential. She would reveal the truth at the perfect moment, turning the situation from one of underestimation to one of respect. Her preparation had also included practicing how to appear natural while staying alert. Many people assumed that a teenager in court would be nervous, fidgeting, or unsure. She had trained herself to remain composed under pressure, to maintain eye contact without staring aggressively, and to speak with enough authority to be heard, but enough humility to be respected. Every detail mattered: body language, tone of voice, facial expressions. It was a skill she had honed quietly for years, almost like an invisible shield of professionalism. At the same time, she wasn't hiding her humanity. She was aware of how this experience affected her personally. She felt the tension in the room, the judgment in the air, and even the faint smiles of amusement from some adults. But she also felt pride in her preparation, in her knowledge, and in her ability to stand up calmly in a world that often underestimated people like her. Pride, she reminded herself, was not arrogance. It was confidence rooted in preparation and self-awareness. She thought briefly about the path that had led her here. It hadn't been easy. She had faced skepticism from teachers, classmates, and even family members who worried that she was taking on too much too soon. But she had persisted. Long nights studying legal texts, early mornings practicing arguments, and countless hours observing real court cases had built her into someone far beyond her years. And all of that preparation was coming together now, in a single quiet moment in a crowded courtroom. The judge, meanwhile, was becoming visibly restless. He could sense that something was unusual, though he didn't yet know what. He tried to reassert authority by asking technical questions designed to expose gaps in knowledge. But she had anticipated these challenges. She answered every question with clarity, precision, and honesty. Each answer subtly reinforced the idea that she was not just capable of understanding the situation, she was capable of excelling under pressure. The courtroom audience was now fully engaged. People were watching not just to see how the questioning would go, but to see how this young girl would continue to handle the pressure. Some were leaning forward, others whispering to neighbors, and a few were nodding quietly in admiration. Even some of the attorneys present were paying close attention, realizing that they were witnessing something rare, a teenager navigating the complexities of a real courtroom with a level of skill that would impress most adults. She also noticed the subtle changes in the judge's demeanor. His condescending tone had softened slightly, replaced by something closer to cautious respect. He wasn't admitting it, of course, but the shift was clear. He had underestimated her, and the result was that the balance of authority in the room was slowly changing. She had not yet revealed her full identity, but the fact that she remained composed, articulate, and unflinching was already turning heads. For her, the moment was not about revenge or proving a point. It was about integrity. She believed in doing the right thing, in standing firmly for truth and justice, and in demonstrating that intelligence and preparation could overcome bias and underestimation. She wanted everyone in the room, especially those who doubted her, to witness what was possible when someone prepared diligently, stayed focused, and refused to be intimidated. At one point, the judge asked a question that required more than just memorized facts. It demanded reasoning, insight, and an understanding of context. She paused briefly, thinking carefully before answering. Her response was measured, logical, and detailed, something few people expected from someone her age. When she finished speaking, there was a pause in the courtroom. People were processing what they had just heard, realizing that this girl was not only accurate but also thoughtful, analytical, and persuasive. It was in that quiet moment that she felt a small sense of satisfaction. She knew she had reached the point where the courtroom was no longer seeing her as a naive teenager. They were starting to see her as someone capable, intelligent, and mature beyond her years. That perception was crucial. It would set the stage for what was coming next, the revelation that would completely change the way the judge and everyone else in the room viewed her. And so, as the questioning continued, she remained calm and focused, knowing that patience and precision were her greatest allies. She was playing a long game, one that would eventually turn an underestimation into respect, skepticism into admiration, and a simple court appearance into a moment that no one would forget. She didn't yet reveal her secret. She didn't need to. The court already felt the weight of her intellect, even without knowing the full truth. And that, she knew, was the most powerful position anyone could hold, being underestimated while quietly holding all the cards. The courtroom was now completely focused on the young girl. The quiet tension from earlier had grown into a heavy curiosity. People leaned forward in their seats, trying to catch every word, every subtle movement. Something unusual was happening, and everyone could feel it even if they didn't yet understand why. The judge, for his part, was trying hard to regain control. He had spent years in that courtroom, confident in his ability to command respect and authority. But something about this teenager was different. She was no ordinary witness. She had an intelligence, a calmness, and a way of observing the room that made him pause. For the first time in a long while, he felt uncertain. He asked another question, one meant to test her memory and make her stumble. His tone was sharper, his eyes narrowing as he expected her to falter. "You say you understand the case, young lady. Explain to me why the timeline of events is important here. Can someone your age truly grasp such complex details?" She paused for only a second, enough to gather her thoughts, and then spoke clearly. "The timeline is important because it shows the sequence of actions and who was responsible at each stage. Understanding this allows us to see if the procedures were followed correctly. Every event matters, and missing even one detail could change the outcome of the case." There was a silence in the room after her answer. Even the adults who had been whispering to each other stopped for a moment. They had expected a simple, nervous reply, something vague. Instead, she had answered with clarity and precision, using language that sounded professional and mature. The judge's expression changed slightly. He had assumed she would be intimidated by the question, that she would fumble or look confused. But her confidence and knowledge were undeniable. He leaned, back in his chair, as if trying to reassess her, trying to find a weakness he could exploit. She noticed the change in his demeanor. It was subtle, but it told her he was beginning to realize that she was different from the typical teenager he dealt with in court. Most young witnesses were nervous, timid, or unsure. Not her. She had prepared, studied, and thought carefully about how to respond to challenges like this. She had also noticed the way the audience was reacting. People were no longer whispering about her age or appearance. Their attention had shifted entirely to her words and her reasoning. She could see the surprise on some faces, the admiration on others. It was clear that her calm, intelligent presence was changing the perception of everyone in the room. As the questioning continued, she began to answer in ways that subtly challenged the judge's assumptions. She didn't argue or appear confrontational, but she used her knowledge to correct small inaccuracies, point out overlooked details, and explain the legal implications of certain actions. Each answer was measured and respectful, but it carried weight. The judge frowned slightly, clearly aware that he was losing the subtle control he usually had over witnesses. He tried to maintain authority by asking more technical questions, ones that required a deeper understanding of law and procedure. But she was ready. She answered each question with a combination of precision and reasoning that left little room for doubt. At one point, he asked a question about a specific legal precedent, assuming she would not know it. Her eyes flicked briefly to her notebook, which she had prepared meticulously, but she didn't need it. She had studied the case in depth and knew the precedent by heart. "The precedent you're referring to," she said, "establishes that actions must be evaluated based on both intent and outcome. Ignoring either factor can lead to an incorrect conclusion. In this case, considering the full context shows that the decisions made were inconsistent with standard procedure." There was a collective intake of breath from the audience. The adults, who had been skeptical, now looked impressed. Even a few attorneys in the room exchanged glances, clearly surprised at the depth of her understanding. The judge, however, seemed momentarily stunned. He had underestimated her, and now he was being forced to reconsider his assumptions in real time. She continued carefully, her tone steady and calm, making sure each word carried the right balance of respect and authority. "It's important to examine all evidence objectively. Emotional bias or assumptions based on appearances can lead to errors. That's why each step must be documented and verified." The courtroom had grown completely silent. Every person present was paying attention. Some of the younger people in the audience, especially those who had felt invisible or underestimated in their own lives, seemed inspired. They could see that intelligence, preparation, and confidence could overcome bias, age, and societal expectations. The judge tried another tactic. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the bench, and asked a series of rapid-fire questions designed to overwhelm her. He expected hesitation, perhaps a flustered reaction, or even an incorrect answer. But she remained composed, answering each question clearly, methodically, and without any sign of panic. It was at this moment that she realized the subtle power she held. By staying calm and demonstrating knowledge, she was reshaping the narrative in the courtroom. People were beginning to see her not just as a teenager, but as someone capable of understanding complex situations and navigating them with skill. She was changing perceptions without having to raise her voice or appear confrontational. She also thought about why this moment mattered beyond the courtroom. There were countless young people who faced underestimation every day, whether because of age, gender, race, or background. By standing firm, she wasn't just helping her case. She was showing that respect and recognition could be earned through preparation, integrity, and courage. She wanted people to see that it was possible to be taken seriously, even when society tried to dismiss you. The judge, now visibly unsettled, paused. His condescending tone had softened, replaced by cautious attention. He had assumed that his experience and authority would intimidate her, but he was beginning to see that she was different. The usual strategies he used to assert dominance weren't working. She was holding her own, calmly and respectfully, and that fact was beginning to shift the power dynamic in the room. She decided to push the subtle challenge further. Carefully, she referenced another legal principle, one that applied directly to the case but that she knew the judge might overlook if he didn't pay close attention. According to procedural standards, she said, all parties must have the opportunity to present evidence fully. Overlooking this requirement can compromise the validity of the case. Ensuring fairness is essential, even in situations where the outcome seems obvious at first glance. The judge's eyes widened slightly. Even he had to admit that her response was accurate, well-articulated, and meaningful. She wasn't being confrontational, she was simply applying her knowledge, and it was undeniable. The room seemed to hold its breath, sensing that something significant was unfolding. The courtroom clerk and the audience were now paying as much attention to the way the judge was reacting as to her words. There was a subtle tension building. People were beginning to realize that this teenager was not just capable of answering questions. She was capable of influencing how the case was understood and how the courtroom perceived the events. At that moment, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She was proving, not through arrogance but through skill and preparation, that assumptions based on age or appearance could be misleading. She was showing that intelligence, calmness, and careful reasoning could turn a potentially intimidating situation into an opportunity for influence and respect. She also remained fully aware that the reveal was coming. She had not yet shown the full extent of her knowledge or her identity as a licensed attorney, but the foundation was being set. The courtroom was now ready to see her in a completely new light. The skepticism, the underestimation, and the subtle condescension were all shifting toward curiosity, attention, and even admiration. Even the judge was now leaning forward slightly, his expression more focused than before. He was used to being in control, but he was beginning to feel the unusual pressure of facing someone who combined youth with intelligence, preparation, and calm authority. It was unfamiliar territory, and he was beginning to respect, though perhaps grudgingly, the skill in front of him. By the end of this session, it was clear that the young girl had not only held her own, but she had subtly shifted the energy in the courtroom. People were watching her, analyzing her every move, realizing that she was far more capable than anyone had imagined. And in that realization, there was a sense of anticipation. Everyone could feel that the next moments would reveal something extraordinary. She had mastered the art of appearing respectful while commanding attention, of staying calm under pressure while subtly influencing the room, and of using knowledge not for show, but to ensure fairness and accuracy. It was a combination rarely seen, and it had completely altered the dynamics of the courtroom. She knew that the real moment, the reveal, The point at which the judge and the audience would fully understand who she was and what she could do, was approaching. But she also knew that patience was key. By letting the courtroom witness her calm skill first, she had made her eventual reveal far more powerful. When it came, it would not be shocking for shock's sake. It would be undeniable, proof of her ability, preparation, and intelligence. And so, as the questioning ceased, the courtroom was quiet, but the tension was electric. Every eye was on the young girl who sat poised on the witness stand, answering questions with confidence that no one expected from someone her age. The judge, who had spent decades commanding authority in courtrooms, was beginning to realize that he had misjudged her. There was something different about her, a quiet strength and intelligence that seemed to radiate from her every word. She had been carefully guiding the courtroom to this moment. Every answer she had given, every subtle correction, every display of calm, had been building anticipation. The audience was sensing it, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. There was a feeling in the air, a sense that something remarkable was about to happen, and everyone present was holding their breath. The judge, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to regain control. He asked another question, hoping to trip her up to show the courtroom that she was just a teenager who had been overestimated. "You say you understand these procedures?" he said, his voice firm. "Explain how a minor discrepancy could affect the outcome of this case. Do you really grasp the implications at your age?" The young girl looked directly at him, her eyes calm, steady, and unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied clearly. "I understand. Every discrepancy, no matter how small, must be examined carefully. Procedures exist to ensure fairness and justice. Ignoring them can lead to mistakes that affect everyone involved. That is why it is important to follow every rule and consider all evidence objectively." The courtroom fell silent. The judge's frown deepened, his usual authority challenged by words that were accurate, thoughtful, and delivered with confidence. He had expected hesitation, uncertainty, even fear, but he found none. Instead, he faced a teenager who not only understood the law but could explain it with clarity and authority. At that moment, she decided it was time. The reveal had been carefully planned in her mind for weeks, and now the moment felt right. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. With a calm, measured voice, she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to clarify something before we proceed. I am not just a witness, I am also a licensed attorney. Here is my bar certification issued several months ago." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. People's heads turned, eyes widening in surprise. The judge blinked, caught off guard, and leaned back slightly. He had assumed she was an ordinary teenager, a witness who needed guidance, who might fumble or make mistakes. Instead, he faced someone who had achieved a professional level of expertise far beyond her years. The audience was stunned. Some whispered to each other, trying to process what they had just seen. The young girl who had seemed so ordinary a moment ago was now revealed as an extraordinary figure, a licensed attorney who had walked into the courtroom under the guise of a teenager to observe, learn, and contribute. The judge, now fully aware of the situation, looked down at the certificate in her hands. For the first time in that courtroom, he seemed unsure of himself. He cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. I did not expect this," he said slowly. "You are licensed?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said, maintaining her calm tone. "I passed the bar in a special early admission program. I am here today not to mislead anyone, but to provide accurate information and ensure that the proceedings are fair and just." The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. The adults who had been skeptical just moments before now looked at her with admiration. The murmurs of surprise and curiosity spread like wildfire. People were trying to imagine how someone so young could accomplish something so rare, something so challenging. Even the judge seemed to pause and reflect. His authority in the room was no longer absolute. He had underestimated her, and now he had to reconsider his perception of her entirely. For decades, he had assumed that teenagers could not understand the complexities of law. that youth meant inexperience. But here was undeniable proof to the contrary. She continued, her voice calm and respectful, but firm. Your Honor, I have prepared extensively for this case. I am confident in my understanding of the facts, the procedures, and the legal principles involved. My intention is not to challenge your authority, but to ensure that the case proceeds with accuracy and fairness. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The courtroom was no longer filled with whispers of doubt or amusement. Instead, there was respect, attention, and a growing sense of admiration. The audience could see that she had not only mastered the law, but had also mastered the art of presenting herself with dignity and confidence. She had anticipated this moment. She knew that revealing her identity too soon could have caused shock or even hostility. But by waiting until she had demonstrated her knowledge and composure, she ensured that the reveal was not just surprising, it was undeniable proof of her skill and intelligence. The timing made all the difference. The judge finally spoke again, his voice steadier but still laced with surprise. I underestimated you. It seems I have been too quick to judge based on age and appearance. I apologize for any disrespect my earlier comments may have caused. She nodded politely. Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your acknowledgement. My goal has always been to contribute accurately and professionally, regardless of age or appearance. The audience responded with a quiet wave of murmurs and subtle applause. Some people's eyes were misty with admiration. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief. It was rare to witness a teenager not only navigate a courtroom with such skill, but to completely change the energy in the room through intelligence, composure, and courage. Her mind, however, was not focused on the reactions around her. She remained aware of the case, the questions still to be asked, and the importance of each detail. The reveal had shifted perceptions, but the work was not yet done. She had to continue presenting accurate information, staying precise, and ensuring that the case was understood in its full complexity. She answered the next series of questions with calm authority. Each response reflected not just knowledge, but careful reasoning and understanding of legal principles. She was able to reference precedents, procedural requirements, and potential consequences in ways that even experienced attorneys might pause to consider. The courtroom listened, rapt and attentive as she spoke with clarity and purpose. Even the judge, now fully aware of her credentials, adjusted his approach. He no longer assumed she needed guidance or that she might make mistakes. Instead, he asked more detailed, thoughtful questions, recognizing that her input could add value to the proceedings. The dynamic in the courtroom had shifted completely. What began as a simple testimony had become a rare display of intellect, courage, and professional skill from someone so young. She could sense that this moment would be remembered. Not just for the surprise of her reveal, but for the message it sent. Intelligence, preparation, and courage can transcend age, appearance, and societal expectations. People who had underestimated her now had to reconsider their assumptions, not through confrontation, but through undeniable evidence of her capability. At one point, she addressed the entire courtroom, not with arrogance, but with quiet authority. It is important to remember, she said, that respect and recognition should not be based solely on age or appearance. Knowledge, preparation, and integrity are what truly determine competence. I hope that today, my presence demonstrates the value of these qualities no matter who possesses them. The courtroom was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. Then softly, a few people began nodding, followed by others. Her statement was not just about her. It was about fairness, respect, and the potential in every individual to be capable, beyond expectations. The judge, visibly thoughtful, leaned back and regarded her with a mix of respect and astonishment. You have taught a valuable lesson today, he said slowly. I admit that I was wrong to underestimate you. Your knowledge and composure are impressive, and I respect the professionalism you have demonstrated. She nodded again, politely, acknowledging his words. She didn't need praise. Her goal was fairness and accuracy, not personal recognition. But the acknowledgement was significant. It symbolized the shift in perception, the transformation from doubt to respect. and the recognition that intelligence and preparation could never be measured by age alone. As the courtroom proceedings continued, the atmosphere had changed completely. The skepticism and underestimation that had initially filled the room were replaced by attention, curiosity, and respect. The young girl had achieved something rare. She had quietly commanded the room through her knowledge, confidence, and professionalism, and then revealed herself as an attorney capable of shaping the discussion with authority. The impact of her reveal was not just in the surprise it caused, it was in the demonstration that preparation, patience, and courage can overcome bias, doubt, and underestimation. Everyone in that courtroom, from the judge to the audience, had witnessed something extraordinary, and through it all, she remained calm, focused, and grounded. She had achieved her goal. She had shown that competence and professionalism are not determined by age, and she had ensured that the case would proceed with accuracy and fairness. The courtroom, once filled with doubt, now held a quiet respect for the young girl who had transformed their expectations simply by being prepared. The courtroom was no longer the intimidating space it had been just a short time ago. The tension had shifted into something almost electrifying. People were still murmuring, but now the whispers were full of curiosity, admiration, and even a quiet sense of inspiration. The young girl had done more than just answer questions. She had completely changed the way the room viewed her, and in doing so, she had changed the energy of the entire courtroom. She remained on the witness stand, calm and composed, fully aware of the impact her presence was having. The judge, who had once looked at her with mild amusement and a hint of condescension, now regarded her with a mixture of respect and contemplation. For someone who had spent decades in courtrooms, used to commanding authority and observing deference, this shift in perspective was remarkable. Her mind, however, was focused on the bigger picture. She wasn't here to impress anyone or to prove a point about herself. Her goal had always been to ensure fairness, accuracy, and clarity in the case. By revealing her identity and demonstrating her knowledge, she had not just corrected underestimation, she had elevated the entire conversation about justice in the courtroom. The judge cleared his throat, finally speaking in a tone that was steady and professional. "I have to admit, I misjudged you," he said. "You have demonstrated not only knowledge of the law but also the kind of composure and insight that is rare in anyone, let alone someone your age. I apologize for any assumptions I made earlier." She nodded politely, acknowledging his words without arrogance. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your acknowledgement. My goal is always to contribute to a fair and accurate understanding of the case. Age or appearance should not determine how seriously someone's input is considered. Preparation, understanding, and integrity should." The courtroom was silent for a moment, as her words sank in. Some audience members whispered to each other, nodding in agreement. A few of the attorneys present exchanged glances, clearly impressed by both her knowledge and her poise. The judge leaned back in his chair, thoughtful, perhaps reflecting on his own assumptions and the lesson he had just been given. Even in her quiet confidence, she felt a sense of fulfillment. This was more than just a personal victory. It was a demonstration that intelligence, preparation, and courage could overcome bias and underestimation. She had proven that respect could be earned through actions, not just titles or age, and that anyone could make a meaningful impact if they approached a challenge with preparation and integrity. The questioning resumed, but the dynamic had shifted completely. The judge no longer asked questions to challenge her confidence. Instead, he asked questions to hear her insight. Her responses were thoughtful, thorough, and precise. She referenced legal principles, procedural standards, and key evidence, providing clarity and perspective that helped the courtroom better understand the case. The audience listened intently. Even those who had been skeptical from the beginning now leaned forward, captivated by her explanations. She had turned a simple courtroom session into a live lesson in intelligence, preparation, and calm authority. The effect was subtle but undeniable. People were inspired not just by what she said, but by how she carried herself. She noticed the subtle nods from some of the adults in the room, small gestures of acknowledgement and respect. It was a reminder that influence didn't have to be loud or aggressive. It could be quiet, steady, and rooted in competence. By staying calm and precise, she had commanded attention and shaped perception without ever needing to assert dominance. Her thoughts briefly drifted to the other young people in the audience, who might be watching and wondering if they could ever achieve something similar. She hoped they could see that age was not a limitation, that preparation and courage mattered more than appearances or societal expectations. She wanted them to understand that respect could be earned through knowledge and composure, and that it was possible to turn doubt into recognition through persistence and integrity. The judge, now fully aware of her credentials and capabilities, seemed to be reflecting more deeply. He had underestimated her at first, as had many others in the courtroom, and that misjudgment had become an important teaching moment. He began asking questions not to test her, but to hear her perspective. Realizing that her insight could genuinely contribute to a more accurate understanding of the case, she responded with calm clarity, carefully weighing her words. Each answer was designed to be informative, precise, and professional, reinforcing her credibility without appearing boastful. The courtroom was hanging on every word. Even the smallest details she mentioned seemed to carry weight, because they were backed by knowledge, observation, and careful reasoning. As the session progressed, the young girl began to sense the full impact of her actions. She had not just navigated the courtroom successfully, she had subtly changed perceptions, challenged assumptions, and inspired others. The adults who had initially doubted her now listened with respect. The judge, who had underestimated her, was now paying careful attention, recognizing the depth of her understanding. And the audience, some of whom had been skeptical or dismissive, was now captivated by her presence and her words. She realized that her role in this courtroom extended beyond the case itself. She had become a symbol of what was possible when preparation, intelligence, and courage intersected. Her presence challenged stereotypes, defied expectations, and demonstrated that age and appearance were not measures of capability. The questioning eventually came to an end, and the courtroom paused. There was a collective sense of quiet reflection. People seemed to be processing what had just happened, the unusual and inspiring sequence of events that had unfolded before them. For some, it was a reminder to question assumptions. For others, it was a lesson in the power of preparation, patience, and composure. The judge spoke again, his tone both respectful and thoughtful. "Today we have witnessed something extraordinary," he said. "Not only has this young attorney demonstrated remarkable knowledge and composure, but she has also reminded us that talent and capability cannot always be measured by age or appearance. We should all take a moment to reflect on the assumptions we make and the importance of giving people the respect they deserve, based on their actions and abilities." The young girl acknowledged his words with a small nod, her expression calm. She had not sought praise, but she understood the significance of the moment. It was more than recognition for herself. It was a broader lesson for everyone in the room. By standing firm, speaking clearly, and demonstrating her knowledge, she had created an opportunity for others to rethink their biases and assumptions. As the courtroom began to clear, she gathered her belongings quietly, still aware of the impact she had made. People approached her softly, congratulating her, shaking her hand, or simply offering a nod of admiration. Some expressed disbelief at her age and her knowledge, while others shared that they had never seen someone handle a courtroom with such confidence. Each interaction reinforced the lesson she had been demonstrating. Respect and recognition come from competence, preparation, and integrity, not assumptions or appearances. Outside the courtroom, she walked down the steps with quiet confidence. The air felt different now, lighter somehow, charged with the subtle energy of inspiration she had created. Passers-by and onlookers looked at her with curiosity, some clearly impressed, others simply thoughtful. She had not only faced a challenging situation, but had transformed it into a moment of learning and reflection for everyone around her. In the days and weeks that followed, her actions in the courtroom were discussed widely. People spoke about the teenage girl who had stunned a judge, commanded a courtroom, and demonstrated that intelligence and courage could defy expectations. Her story inspired other young people, particularly those who felt underestimated or overlooked, to believe in their own abilities and to understand that preparation and integrity were more powerful than doubt or bias. The judge, too, reflected on the experience long after the courtroom had emptied. He realized that underestimating someone based on age or appearance could blind him to genuine talent and insight. The lesson was clear. Competence and courage could come from anywhere, and those who failed to recognize it limited their own understanding of the world. For the young girl, the experience was both a personal milestone and a meaningful contribution to her community. She had shown that preparation, intelligence, and calm authority could influence even the most skeptical audience. She had revealed her true capabilities at the perfect moment, earning respect without arrogance and inspiring others without seeking attention. As she continued her journey, she carried the lesson with her. The most powerful change often begins quietly, with patience, preparation, and a commitment to integrity. By believing in herself and demonstrating her knowledge, she had transformed a moment of doubt into a lasting lesson about respect, capability, and the importance of recognizing talent wherever it exists. Her story became more than a courtroom moment. It became a reminder that courage, intelligence, and preparation could challenge assumptions, inspire change, and leave a lasting impact. And as she moved forward, she did so with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced skepticism, transformed it into recognition, and shown the world that potential lay